Hello, very warm welcome. Today we have Marina Kindelan as guest, and she's from AESG, Facades Director for Middle East. Very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure for us. Marina, today we are talking about a very special theme of facades. And I was asking myself, what is a facade? We all are looking at them every day, every hour, and we see so many of these. But what is a facade? What is it?
You went to the most complicated question directly, right? To go to ask what is facades. So I guess like a lot of people have different responses to that one. I like to compare facades with a skin. I think this is the way when I started to work as a facade consultant and getting more in the detail of facade expertise, I started to hear about this comparison of facade with a skin. And I actually, now that I've been working a few years, let's keep it like that, on the facade industry, I completely understood the meaning. Because in reality, if you think about the building like as a human being, let's say, for example, we're talking, if we go to the structure, we will compare it with the skeleton, right? If we talk about the veins, organs, we could compare this with the MEP, right? All the functions that make the building work. But then what is the skin? The purpose of the skin is to actually protect the human from the external environment. And it's the same, the facade is actually protecting. And that's the main goal of the facade. While at the same time, if you ask, for example, to an architect, could be comparing more with a dress, because it's what it makes them, like the character or the identity. So I'm in between the skin and kind of the dress of the building.
That sounds super exciting, because I know it from also architects. There was a very famous coal mine in Germany. It's called Zollverein coal mine. And this is a World Heritage now. And the architects, the famous Bauhaus architects, they said the facade is just a skin for a machine, because they made the architect around the machine. And so it's, on one hand, it's a protection, but on the other hand, it has, from my point of view, it has much more impact. It also has, before we start with technology and innovation, but it also has a lot of social impact, right? As a facade, it creates our surrounding, and we are having a lot of impact into these kind of design of the facades. And what does it do?
I know, following your point, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's why it's really important that, and I think the architects understand the importance of the facade, because it can change the whole environment surrounding. If you do a building with a strong character, like a strong personality, let's say, the building itself, you can create that the surrounding to start to be more rich, and the people wants to move to that area. It happens with some iconic buildings, like, for example, Guggenheim. Yeah, it's more about the building, but the facade is almost everything. It's part of the building. And those buildings become an iconic area, iconic building, and everyone wants to live around. Same when you talk about heritage building, the fact of keeping the heritage and maintaining the original point of the facade, or like the aspect of the building, is crucial, and is for me, is really important. That's more the aesthetic part, more than the performance part, but it's crucial, and I think the architects really understand that.
But that brings me to one point. When I look at all these nice old castles from Middle Age and everything, there it was also, the facades had another importance, because they just mirrored the might. And there is a lot of handicrafted issues, also all the old churches in Europe and abroad and so. And what was this? And what is changing now when you look at it in our age now?
Well, that's just going through the whole history of the construction. But again, I think the facade, what it's been responding from the beginning of the construction, is that it was responding to what it was available or the construction methods. Yeah, so we started from really robust stone facades that mainly was what it was available, smaller windows because we were not able to actually make it bigger spans. So it was like more solid, robust construction. And when steel start to appear in the industry, and it's not just in the facade, it's just how the industry, the construction industry evolves. So that helped us to actually start to play more with the facade. So you can see the change when the glass and the steel came into the play, that the buildings start to look completely different. We start to have these open, transparent glass boxes around. We start to be able actually to build high rises. So the whole change is not just for the facade, it's just the whole industry. And I think what we reached to a point that there is not going to be that much change in terms of like as the change that we have seen on the past centuries, but there is going to be a change on more in the detail, on the focus, again, performance of the facade, type of glazing. I think if I'm correct, the first DU glass, it was in 1965. So before that, everything that we had, it was monolithic. So performance-wise, the buildings were not performing. So even though visually, maybe it doesn't have an impact, performance-wise, it does. So that's maybe what I see. We are now more developing the things on the facade, more that something is not done visual, but it's more on the detail, on the performance, something that we will know.
That's interesting because, as you already mentioned, for example, Guggenheim, I mean, there is a lot of material innovation now also into that because I guess also because of the climate change and all these issues we have. But I want to come into the technological part of it, into the technology innovation around this. What about this one? How did it start? Because as you said before that, we had stone and we had handicraft, and that was the protection. So that was the technology was handmade. Now then it got machine made, and we had the steel constructions were starting and so on. And so and how did it run? I mean, as you said, so the history of that.
So if I could, well, and again, this is. If I take a look to the history of how this has been developed, I think it's more for the need. Yeah, I think they start to need to build more residential, more office buildings. Well, past centuries was not that much requirement, so they want to build things fast, and now performance. So it needs to be fast and with good quality. So the market is being pushed. Unless the market asks for it, we will not have suppliers. We will not have, mainly suppliers investing in developing new technologies. It needs to be a demand. And I think the first demand that existed, it was that they needed to build more residential, more commercial, more offices building fast. Steel, glass was kind of like a big deal there. And then we are evolving and we can see how we can see all the materials. Now one thing that we are asking is durability, right? One big topic that is coming into place is, okay, we know how to build, we build with good quality, but it needs to be resilient, needs to last as long as possible. Because I don't know if you know, but facade has a lifespan between 25 years to 50 years. Yeah, depends on the elements. So if we are thinking that the main structure has a lifespan of 100 years, but the facade doesn't have that lifespan, then is it really sustainable what we are designing? Because we might need to actually demolish the building. So what the market is pushing is to extend this lifespan, or if not it's possible, because we understand that some material has some limitations, then how we retrofit it to give a second life to this facade. I think it's going towards that way.
Wow. Yeah, that's so
long response.
No. It's great because what we see is, you mentioned sustainability. I mean, this is a word which is now in everybody's mouth. On one hand. On the other hand, especially in this kind of field, sustainability is really, from my point of view, a very important issue. Also because I think it generates a lot of innovation. And that's something for me I was thinking about. So, I mean, now we have steel, glass, and maybe some other material. So what is going on in the future? What is the facade going into? When we started from the history, just briefly, but what is it? So how many innovation ideas are coming from sustainability?
I think the facade is being developing a lot in terms of the sustainability, but really focus on reducing the operational carbon. Yeah, so that's really interesting, and I think that was a big push that we had to do it because our buildings, we were building more and more, and our buildings, in terms of the consumption of energy, really high. That's why DGO glasses were introduced. This is why thermally broken systems were introduced. The better performance insulation, water membranes to actually make tight the systems. All these items have been introduced and improved the systems as such. But all of these items were focused on the operational carbon, which I think is really important. My problem is when we talk about sustainability, a lot of times we focus too much on operational and we tend to forget about the embodied carbon. So for me, if we talk about sustainable facades, you need to count both things at the same time. I'm saying that because in some studies that I have done with the team, because we had a project that it's a net zero energy building. We were doing some studies for one of the net zero energy buildings. And at some point it came like we had to do triple glazing. Yeah. So triple glazing to improve the performance of the building, the operational, to reduce the operational carbon. What happened is when we dig a little bit in detail for that specific project, again, that can't be generic, it needs to be a study case by case, we realized that the amount of embodied carbon triple glazing brings, it actually doesn't balance. So because, again, the glazing is 25 years of lifespan. So then at some point, you need to calculate all of that to know what is sustainable. And the last thing is, in reality for me, and I always think that for me, the most sustainable thing is to reuse what we have. This is not just the materials that we have, it's the buildings that we have. So it's going back to the same thing. If we have a building, let's give it a second life. If a building is obsolete, let's redo it, retrofit. That, for me, is sustainable.
Yeah. I like that a lot, that you're just touching the holistic approach. I mean, this is all the discussion we have also now within the automotive industry, where we're discussing about cars and everything. And so, you have to see it from like cradle to cradle. So I mean, it's really a circular way of thinking, and I like that a lot. And I also think that these are huge issues the industry has to focus on. And that also brings me to one thing we have been discussing in the IDI Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation. One of my colleagues, he is Professor Rafi. He is also in a lot of innovational technology inventing, and we started to thinking about of 3D printing for facades out of sand, because in this region here we have very, very special conditions because of the heat and everything. And we are thinking about, and we have a lot of sand. So I mean, and I was thinking, if you're thinking in these kind of new technology possibilities in 3D printing, in new materials, local materials, and all that things, because also there, that's the way you're thinking about and you're discussing. And so therefore, I was asking the question, so are there any of these crazy issues which could become reality in the next future?
So more the use of natural material with new technologies.
For example,
I think this is actually something that is happening at the moment. Maybe it's not as common as other elements of the facade or typical systems, but it's happening because, again, it's going back to the embodied carbon. They know that if the material comes from here, from here, there is a local resource. Also needs to be studied in detail because it's not as easy as that. But if it's locally available, and if you have it also, it responds to the climatic requirements and to the environment. For example, specifically with the sun, there is a trend in some areas, actually more focused in KSA, in Saudi Arabia, to build with Adobe. Adobe mainly is is sand, but it's mud bricks. So they went back to this one, and I think it's so interesting. I have to point with that one. Well, there is a market, and I think that it's really interesting to study that opportunity, and it could be a sustainable solution. We need to understand that traditional construction techniques, they were responding to those requirements. They were responding to certain heat loads, certain things that at the moment are slightly different. Our comfort temperature is around 20 degrees, 2023. So we need to make sure actually the internal spaces meet those requirements. What I face is, while, for example, sand helps in terms of the thermal performance, to reach to that value, insulation is everything. Yeah, so it helps, but it needs to be a more hybrid solution.
Yeah, I see. So, I mean, now we have been discussing, or we started with, let me say, with emotional impacts, and so then we came to technology issues, which are interesting. But on the other hand, all these innovations, what we have been talking about, all these sustainable issues, what we have been talking about, they also have, from my point of view, a highly emotional impact. And so I was asking myself, I mean, again, what does a facade do with me as normal citizen going through a city, you know? I'm changing the perspective again. So sorry for this, but
no, it's perfect. Now I don't know. I'm gonna struggle with the response.
But I think, you know, I'm just a simple guy. So and I'm asking myself, if I'm going into a city or wherever, so in a human surrounding, there is always a facade touching me. And so what do facades do with humans or with citizens, or how do they design the cities? How do they design the spaces?
Oof. I think then in that case, well, I'm an architect also as a background, so I need to put the architect hat in this case, because I think it's more the aesthetic part. So I think the facade, let me think, because the facade has two major roles when we talk about the emotions or what makes to the people. The facade is telling you what is behind, what is inside, and is welcoming you in the building or is not welcoming you in the building. So if you walk through the city and then you see certain type of facades with balconies, things like that, you know this is residential. If it's everything glass tower, you feel a little bit more maybe cold, like a little bit more distant. So it gives a little bit, it helps to the scale of the city. Of course, the scale of the building is going to give the whole feeling, but the facade, it helps. It's going to tell you if it's more like this kind of traditional neighborhood, or then you are going through office towers, and the facade is giving that is telling you that information. That is more with the architecture hat. And of course, if we are talking about traditional materials, it brings you back to heritage. If it's new materials, it's more modern. We have amazing buildings in the Middle East that shows how we can push the limits of the materials and challenge architecture with the facade. And it's impressive because then you see innovation, future. That happens with mainly museums, buildings that are really impressive, iconic. So it gives you the feeling. It talks a lot about the building, and it's part of it. It's as a combine. That is more with the architecture hat. With the facade consultant hat is slightly different. It's more about if it's a durable material, or if it's how the material preserves. So if it's durable, good conditions, you think like, okay, that building is good quality. It's talking about the quality of the building. Facade is telling you what you can expect inside. If it's failing, then you imagine that something is going to fail inside. If it's transparent, it's welcoming you. If it's really opaque, maybe it's pushing you away. So that's like a little bit more from performance part of it, but also transmits some emotions. Know if that was the question.
Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, you already mentioned it before. So especially museums, for example, they show really the enormity of possibilities, what can be possible in facades and everything. So what would be what's your most interesting facade in that?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one because I'm
No,
gonna tell you that might surprise you. Like I'm a huge fan of the Brutalist, the British Brutalist, where there is a lot of concrete. This concrete with mainly it was precast or in situ with glazing. I'm really into that part because I think it was facade and structure, everything was combined in one. I don't think it's the most efficient, it's not the most sustainable, but I found it really amazing in terms of the aesthetics. I found it intriguing. I think we can give now a second life to those buildings, but they will remain. They are like really powerful. So that's what I like. And it's not a facade, it's actually a building as such. What about you? Do you have any like prefer facades or buildings?
I really need to laugh because I have a close friend of mine, Christian Boros. He's a quite famous German designer and art collector. And he has a huge art collection. And meanwhile, in Berlin, he bought an old bunker and he built his museum inside there. And then he built a penthouse up there where he lives. And I like that second life of something a lot. And we discussed long time ago, but we discussed what kind of issues you have inside and outside, you know, so with these kind of things. So I'm also a friend of these things, but on the other hand, first of all, what I like here, for example, is are the natural facades. Also the natural, so I mean, which have a sandy character. I also like the old towers, what they have here. And so all these things coming from a local cultural understanding and background. But I also like it when these issues are transformed into nowadays needs. So when there is a modern kind of interpretation of something like this. And therefore, for example, I like the idea, as we have seen from Burj Khalifa, for example, that a facade now is just also used as a projection part. I like it that it was coming from biology, so that they had the rhythm of the architecture and they combined it with a facade, which is now not only protecting, it's not only protecting what's inside, it's also taken what outside is and sees it in a different role. So I like these things a lot. I don't know. Is this interesting for facade specialists?
No, of course. And I think you brought a really good point. I think, for example, you mentioned the earth materials, right? Or that finish. I really like it. And I like it in this country because actually it brings you back to really their traditional architecture. Yeah, I think it's really important to keep that identity and not forget it because we tend to build and to see more high-rise here, glass boxes, glass high-rises, that I think is really nice because it's making the city modern city, like a business city, and giving a new identity. But I think it's important that there is always also another part that keeps growing with the more traditional architectural style, more earth style, low-rise building with this earth kind of brownish color, that it gives actually the identity. It keeps the identity while you have the modern part. If in all the cities in the world, you have always the more traditional part and the more modern. So I think it's important to keep it. And here, earth is mainly the character.
And that's so amazing because this is something which really tackles me all the time when I'm going around in these kind of areas, cities. I mean, they all more or less look a bit like the same.
Yeah, no, yes, I give you that. I think that was a point.
Say no.
I think there is that it happens. There was a time when it becomes really fashionable to do these glass towers, and the glass actually came. It was quite similar, so you could see around the wall that period of time where there was these greenish, bluish towers all across. Now it's changing. Now it's different. Now the glass is not that it's still the trend, but now there are like way more options, more innovation, combination, and the buildings are changing. They are getting away from this typical. So that's why, in my opinion, they all look the same, because there was a time where there is a boom. All of them designed similar, because also the available materials that we had, it was a little bit limited. So but now it's changing. Now I can see more diversity, and I'm expecting in the next 10 years, each city is going to have more like their own character.
It's nice. So, I mean, it's differentiation then.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, this is, as we started, or as you mentioned in the beginning, it's a skin. It's a skin on one hand. On the other hand, it also projects kind of personality, right?
Mm.
So, and all these cities, they have their own personality. And I'm wondering also here, I mean, what I really like is, on one hand, we have very interesting and great international global architecture. We also have some spaces which are, especially I think in the private area, we have also a lot of villas which are really, let me say, individual, also in terms of facades and everything. And it creates the character of an area. And what do you see there? What are the trends? What you can see there as a specialist in that field?
So what I'm seeing, and I like it a lot, is I see all these international architects. A lot of them are here, and they've been based here for a long time, so they understand the culture. Some of them have grown here, so they know better than anyone. But the ones that comes from outside, they've been long enough to understand what are the needs. So they start to design to respond to the local needs, not just the aesthetics, also the climatic conditions. So it's quite interesting to see how it's been changing and how it has changed, and now how they really push for these buildings to respond to this local. So that's going back to the previous question that you had. They are designing more for this local requirement, more for what is needed here. So I think that's what I see is changing
Oh,
trend.
that's great. I mean, then what you say is also in the field of facades. You also say that it is important, let me say, to think global and act local.
Well, yeah, I like it. I didn't say it, but I like it. I like it a lot. Yes, it is. I mean, and it's amazing to have international architects working on projects, but they need to always understand the local needs. And I think all the architects tend to do that. It's just allowing them with enough time and maybe the resources to understand the local needs, to make sure that the projects are specific.
Thank you so much. I really like that approach. That brings me to one question also, which tackles me. I mean, who is doing facade? As you said, so I mean, you look at from a facade specialist perspective, you look at from an architectural perspective, but who is doing facades? And what do I need to do to be in the way to get facades done?
There are not that many specialists. I mean, we are quite few of us. It's growing. It's significantly growing. First, because of the need. At the moment, we are building more and more complex buildings, and there is a need to have a specialist. So I think that's why the facade industry, in terms of the consultancy, has grown. But the facade industry, in terms of construction, has been there all the time. But there's been more and more specialized, again, because of the needs of the market. More complex building, more complex facades. So I think it's just growing. And there is not that many facade consultants or experts. Again, I think it's because the career just started, or the specialist in terms of the study started just 10, 15 years ago. But it's just mainly people through their experience. So this is where we are.
Thank you so much. I was also asking myself, is it more engineering question? Is it a design question? Of course, it's in the end, it's both.
It's a combination of both, because of course the engineer part is the most important thing, because the design part is taken by the architect. So for example, if I'm talking about the consultancy, the majority of the design part is taken by the architects, But don't forget that when we go to the details, there is so much to design too. That's why I like the architecture background to be involved always when in the consultancy. The engineer part is the extra mile that we go above, not above, but we support the architect. So with that extra mile on the engineer part, and that happens on consultancy and on the contractor side.
So Marina, thank you so much for this wonderful and really interesting talk about facades. I honestly didn't know what kind of different content is in that field. I liked it because we are talking about the emotional impact of facades. We are talking about the technology impact. We are talking about the human perspective, and finally also the sustainable idea. And what I really learned is that we also have another innovative new jobs in the future, which is kind of facade designer, however, or engineer or architect, however you're talking it. So I want to thank you so much, and I wish you a wonderful time as facade specialist. And we are looking forward to our next talk, which we will have, and I say goodbye.